You're watching the Daily Decrypt. Welcome to Currency Competition, bitches. I am your host, Amanda. Today's episode is brought to you by Node 40. There are a lot of things happening in Bitcoin core development right now, but not all of it is easily digestible at first glance. To get the inside scoop, we've reached out to Andreas Antonopoulos, and we got even more than we bargained for.
So Andreas, you responded to my shout out, basically, my call for a commentator on Segregated Witness. And you are not a Bitcoin core developer, but you are a man who knows everything about Bitcoin. In fact, as it's been said, and as is literally true, you have written the book on mastering Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So for anybody who doesn't have a sense of who you are, where you're coming from, and why they should listen to you, will you please give us your background?
So I am a developer. I'm a computer scientist by trade, and I've specialized in security over the years, and I wrote the book Mastering Bitcoin. I'm currently writing the second edition, and part of that is writing about Segregated Witness. So I've been studying it now for 2 months and done some shows about it, and I'm writing the chapter on Segregated Witness for the book, or the section rather. So it's something I'm very interested in, and it's really quite amazing work.
So without further ado, I do have a list of questions here for you, actually, but naturally the first one is, please tell us, what is Segregated Witness? And then after that, let us move into a general discussion of the Bitcoin Core roadmap, if you don't mind.
Witness is another word for cryptographic proofs, and the signatures used in Bitcoin are a form of witness. Segregated witness, simply spoken, means separating the signatures from both the transaction data structure and the block data structure into their own separate data structure. Taking the signatures out of the transaction data structure is really what this is about. And it has a number of effects when you do that, which are all very, very interesting and very positive for Bitcoin. So segregated witness means simply separating signatures out.
Okay. And what is the goal? Why segregated witness?
Well, the real goal, initially, the creation of segregated witness, was to clean up some of the functions of Bitcoin, and it was developed by Peter Wohler as a form of transaction malleability fix, because the one thing that's not static within the transaction that can be malleated is the signature itself, because everything else is usually covered by the signature, so you can't change it without effectively invalidating the signature. But the signature itself can be malleated, and a lot of the transaction malleability, most all of it, comes from malleating the signature. So if you take the signature out of the transaction, then the transaction ID is not based on the signature anymore. The hash of the transaction, which we use as an ID, is not based on the signature, which means that you can't malleate the transaction ID. That's a really big and important development. It helps with chaining transactions. It helps with things like Lightning Network and payment channels, and it resolves a lot of the problems we have with transaction malleability. There is a few.
Oh, please, before you continue, what is transaction malleability in simpler terms?
Transaction malleability is essentially a quirk in Bitcoin and other cryptographic systems, malleability in general, where you can make changes, unauthorized changes to a transaction, and rebroadcast it with a different transaction ID. You can't change where the funds are coming from or where the funds are going to, because that's covered by the signature. But you can make a small modification to the signature. Think of it in simple terms. Let's say that the signature, I'm just going to use a simplified example, padding. Let's say that the signature contained the number 6. Well, in the analysis of the algorithm, 6 and 06 are exactly the same. But if you pad a number in a certain way, it will change the fingerprint of that transaction, even though that signature is interpreted in exactly the same way. And so you can modify parts of the signature because they're not covered by the signature, and produce a transaction with a completely different ID. And by doing that, you can jam it into the network and cause confusion. Transaction malleability has been blamed for a number of thefts at Bitcoin exchanges, where people essentially are getting a form of double withdrawal using transaction malleability. It also allows you to do denial of service attacks against the network, as well as gum up the works for people who are using payment channels or chaining lots of transactions together.
Okay. So with segregated witness being intended to solve the problem of transaction malleability, is it also true that it should allow for more transactions per block, as it will decrease the amount of data required for a transaction?
Yeah, so one of the interesting side effects of segregated witness, which Peter Will understood once he was developing this, was that you could start counting block size differently and give some capacity increases directly through segregated witness. The idea is really simple. Transactions are kind of the key that opens the door to get into the blockchain, right? So you need a signature on the transaction in order to validate it before it's mined into the blockchain. But once a transaction is in the blockchain, nobody really checks those signatures ever again. We don't go back and check signatures from transactions that happened a long time ago. They're buried in the blockchain. They've been validated, done. So the signature is only used once for validation. Here's a simple example. When you write a paper check, which will be familiar to many Americans, although in the rest of the world, people have moved beyond them, you have the option to go to your online banking system and look at the photo of the check after it's been submitted by whoever cashed that check, right? So you can look and check that the signature on the check is correct and it was properly endorsed, etc. Now, that's not part of your bank statement, and you don't really need it unless you're verifying that check was properly cashed and properly signed. And once you're done, it sits there. It just hangs around. The same thing applies to signatures. So what if you could simply take them out of the transaction? The other interesting thing to note is that signatures are actually 75% in some transactions, of 75% of the total space. And the more we use multisig, the bigger the signatures get, because a lot of the data from multisig actually gets moved to the input signing side of the transaction. So with large complex scripts and multi-signature have very large signatures, and they take up a lot of space in the blockchain, and nobody ever cares about them after they've been validated.
All right, so that is sounding like a lot of pros. A lot of pros for segregated witness. Does it have any cons, or is it all pro? Are there any trade-offs for this development?
Well, actually, I'm not done with the pros, and that's really where this gets interesting.
Holy Hannah!
Yeah, and I don't know if there are any cons, and we have to think about that critically. But for the time being, really, this is quite a significant positive development and innovation for Bitcoin. So the other part of segregated witness, the reason it wasn't considered until now, is because fixing malleability and removing transaction signatures from the transactions is something that requires an overhaul of the network, and it was assumed that this would have to be by a hard fork. However, at some point in November, Luke Dash Jr. Figured out a way of doing this with a soft fork. It's a bit of a trick, but it's actually a really interesting trick. And what it does is it allows you to start putting a version number in front of the Bitcoin script. And what that does is it allows you to upgrade the version number of a script while old clients can't see the difference and still validate transactions perfectly, which is the definition of a soft fork. Old clients continue to operate without upgrading. They're just validating a bit less than they were before. And new clients can now upgrade scripts. Now, this trick has enormous implications, because once you can version scripts, you can now introduce dozens and dozens of soft forks in parallel to change all kinds of the scripting mechanism. Already, we've seen two proposals that are really, really innovative. One is to reduce the burden of the signature validation by turning it from an order n squared operation to an order n operation, from exponential to linear. And the other one is to change the format the checksig uses in the script operator to allow offline devices like hardware wallets to be able to validate inputs better. So these are esoteric things, but they're upgrades that people have been really, really trying to find a way to make to Bitcoin. But all of these previously required a hard fork. So this trick is not just useful for SegWit, it's useful for introducing all kinds of things through soft fork, and really accelerating the innovation in the scripting language. And all together, these three aspects of segregated witness: transaction malleability, increasing the capacity of the block by removing a lot of the information that's not useful after validation, and at the same time, upgrading version scripts so you can do soft forks, make it a truly compelling feature that solves a lot of problems. Just one more example. Gregory Maxwell has developed a system called confidential transactions, which is a very highly secure way of encrypting the information in a transaction so you can't even see what value is being transmitted or exchanged by that transaction. And that is being implemented in a sidechain. Well, now you can do confidential transactions as a soft fork directly in Bitcoin. And it's just one of the examples of what you can do with these tricks. So segregated witness, really interesting, lots of facets to it, the least of which is separating the signatures.
So let me see if I understand the deployment of a soft fork correctly. Anyone running a node who was interested in participating in that soft fork would simply choose to run the Bitcoin Core software, but with a slight variance in it, and it would be fully compatible with all of the rest of the nodes. But with the slight variance, it would be basically how would a soft fork? Would a majority of nodes need to be running that soft fork variance, and then it becomes the thing, or how does a soft fork become the thing?
Well, there's two aspects to it. The first one is soft fork activation, which is usually done by a voting process. And here we have another innovation called version bits, or BIP9, which is being introduced in parallel, which allows you to have multiple soft forks. What it allows you to do is say, if this bit in the version of the block is set, that means that you want to implement this soft fork. The miners then set that bit, and once 75% of the blocks have that bit set, you activate the feature, and then once 95% of the blocks have that bit set, that feature is then enforced for validation. So it's a two-step voting process. You reach a quorum, and then you pass the vote, essentially. We've done that successfully with 3 BIPs so far, the most recent being check lock time verify. And these incremental features can now be voted on in parallel. Previously, it would involve an increase in the block version from, say, block version 3 to block version 4, as was done with check lock time verify. But now you turn the block version into a bit field, so you can do these in parallel. 3 soft forks have happened. One with increasing the block version from 1 to 2, and then again from 2 to 3 to introduce a transaction malleability fix, and then from 3 to 4 to introduce check lock time verify. But what this would do is previously you could only have one happening at a time, and the vote had to be completed. And it was actually difficult to reject one and then move to the next. With the new proposal, you can actually do multiple soft forks simultaneously, independent votes, and reject one, accept the other, etc. So that's the activation of the soft fork. But the important feature of a soft fork is that it is forwards compatible. Let me give you an example, which I read on, I think, one of the postings by one of the core developers. If you want to open, for example, an old Word document, I can open Word 1998 in my current version of Microsoft Word. That's backwards compatibility. So it recognizes old formats. Forwards compatibility is when a version of Microsoft Word 1998 that hasn't upgraded can still open the documents that we use today in a certain way. It may lose some of the information, may not see the whole document, it may not be able to understand some of the new features, but it can still open the document. Soft forks are a form of forwards compatibility, meaning that clients that have not upgraded yet to the new code don't break. They don't stop validating. They can still remain validating on the correct consensus chain. It's just that they're validating less information. They're not seeing some of the new features, but they're able to ignore them and continue validating. A hard fork, by comparison, means that if you don't upgrade, you can no longer validate blocks, and you are no longer part of the consensus chain. So if you don't upgrade, you're off the network.
Are there any risks involved to soft forks?
Well, there are some risks. There are some risks involving compatibility. So any change to the network obviously affects the software. If there are bugs, that can cause problems. Although these features are often tested on a separate testnet. In fact, Segregated Witness testnet has been running now for more than a month. And that allows us to make sure that before you upgrade the code, there's a lot of testing. And the miners have become very conservative about upgrading code. It's generally believed that soft forks are less dangerous than hard forks. But the problem that some people identify here is that they don't force the network to upgrade, which means that you can end up with a lot of old clients that are gradually validating less and less and less and less. Previously, they'd get kicked off the network. So some people want a more hard approach. They want you to either upgrade or get off the network. And so that's really a philosophical disagreement rather than a technical issue.
So you've brought me to a question that I didn't even anticipate myself asking, but you used when you were talking about this confidential transactions from Gregory Maxwell as a sidechain. What in the hell is a sidechain? Like, I thought that sidechains were still perhaps like highly theoretical. I've tried to look into them and just like, blah. Like, are sidechains real? Is a sidechain something I could use today?
Absolutely. So sidechains, the first sidechain called Elements Alpha was launched about, I think about 6 months ago. It's been running since. It has more than a dozen distinct features that are experimental features. Basically, it's like a sandbox where people can create a testnet with advanced features where they can experiment with new capabilities in Bitcoin. And on that testnet, people have developed a lot of things, including check lock time verify, essentially got its preview on Elements, and then got implemented in the main chain. Confidential transactions and many malleability fixes and other things like that. Now, at the moment, sidechains are implementing somewhat of a two-way peg, meaning you can move Bitcoin into the sidechain and then back. So you can move main chain Bitcoin into Elements Bitcoin, and then from Elements Bitcoin back.
And these sidechains live on the Bitcoin blockchain?
No, they're parallel. They're chains to the side of Bitcoin.
Chains to the side.
What they have essentially is a two-way connector that allows you to move Bitcoin from the Bitcoin main chain to a sidechain, any sidechain, and then back.
Are they still running on the same infrastructure, however, like same nodes, same miners, or are they their own network?
They're their own network. They're essentially an alt chain, but with a two-way decentralized exchange capability between them and the main Bitcoin chain.
So who's hosting the infrastructure for Elements? Like this is new information for me.
Yes, that's hosted primarily by Blockstream and a number of participants into that. A number of exchanges are building a new intra-exchange liquidity pool called Liquid on a sidechain, for example. Again, that's something that Blockstream has started. Now, up to now, sidechains would have required a complex process to be fully integrated into Bitcoin. But with this new trick, you can actually introduce the mechanism for sidechains through a soft fork too. So all of this is going to lead to an enormous increase in the speed of innovation in the network. A lot of things that were very difficult to do can be done now. And a lot of the little glitches and quirks of Bitcoin can be ironed out in a way that previously involved a very complex hard fork dance. Now could be done by soft fork. This is really exciting news. I think 2016, we're going to see an absolute explosion of innovation in the Bitcoin software.
So now, is Blockstream and their affiliates, are they looking for more infrastructure hosting? I mean, could I become a node of the Elements sidechain, or what are they looking? How are they looking to run their infrastructure?
Well, it's very similar to downloading Bitcoin Core and running it. I run an Elements Alpha node as myself. So you basically download the software, compile it, and run it, and you're running a node I run a Bitcoin core node. I also run an Elements Alpha node. I run a number of different nodes just to test software out and to see how it's working. So yes, anyone can participate. Again, it's a completely open, decentralized network. And we're going to see over time this allowing essentially a lot of the things that are very separate today, like all of the altcoins and other chains that are out there that do things like Factum, like document registries, or Ethereum for contracts, or Dash, or any of the other altcoins. All of those could actually end up working as sidechains to Bitcoin, which would then allow you to seamlessly transfer from one asset to the other without using a centralized exchange in a completely decentralized programmatic manner.
So that brings me to another question I wanted to ask you. In your personal vision of the cryptosphere in, say, 4 years, do you see people choosing to implement new ideas via sidechains of Bitcoin? Or do you see people finding it more profitable to create their own networks, altcoins? How do you see all of this playing out?
Well, this has always been a really big conundrum for people who want to implement features, because it's very difficult to bootstrap a network with a level of security. Bitcoin recently, just last week, passed 1 exahash per second of security. That kind of infrastructure is very difficult to build. It took 7 years for Bitcoin to build it, and because of the network effect, it's very difficult for another chain to get that level of security. And that's a good thing to have. So the network effect is very powerful. So for developers, the real question is my feature compelling enough and different enough and hard enough to implement in Bitcoin that it's worth doing an alt chain with all of the bootstrapping challenges that brings? Or is it something that potentially we could do on Bitcoin and gain the advantage of the network effect and security? Well, that question has become a lot easier to answer because through sidechains and these new soft fork mechanisms, a lot more things that previously could not be done on Bitcoin can be done on Bitcoin directly, or tied to Bitcoin in a two-way peg. That's going to make it much more compelling to build on the network effect of Bitcoin. Now, that doesn't mean that the innovation all moves to Bitcoin, or that, in fact, it encourages more innovation on altchains. Because if you can build an altcoin that is specialized and differentiated in a way that isn't related to Bitcoin, maybe it has a different monetary policy or a different focus, say privacy, as Dash and Zero Cash have. But you can also have a completely seamless, decentralized two-way exchange with Bitcoin to use it as a reserve currency. Well, that's even better. So it's going to accelerate innovation in altcoins. It's going to accelerate innovation on Bitcoin. I always look at this as one big ecosystem. None of these things are competitive. What we're competing with is the old obsolete idea of monopoly currencies. We live in a world where monopoly currencies are neither necessary nor suitable. And so we're past that. There is not going to be one winner to take all. It's all about choice now.
I can't tell you how happy I am to hear you express that sentiment because I feel the same. And I have one more question to ask you in terms of network cryptocurrency security. What is the balance, if I could even phrase it this way, between like the exahashes or whatever, basically the hashing power of a network versus its actual node count, like actual instances of its blockchain? How do you see both or either of those as affecting security?
Node count is a lot less important. In Bitcoin, for example, we have seen over time, in the beginning, in order to run a wallet, you needed a Bitcoin core, so you had a node. So using a wallet involved having a node. So people had a lot of nodes in the beginning, and gradually as you could run lightweight clients without a node for wallets, the number of nodes has gone down. There's probably about 5,000 nodes on the Bitcoin network at the moment. I haven't looked at the numbers. That's the ones we know are listening. For example, all of the nodes I'm running are not visible in that count, but they're still running and validating transactions. Nodes are important for validating transactions, but what's most important for security is the amount of proof of work that you can put behind it, because that's what makes it an immutable record. Validating on the way to getting the information to miners is important for a number of reasons for propagation. But the Bitcoin network has no problem with propagation. Within a few seconds, a transaction floods the entire global network, is reachable to everyone. Connectivity is very nice. So we're not having any problems with latency or propagation issues. The number of nodes is fine. And that's why it's difficult to compete with that network effect, because increasing the number of nodes is relatively easy it doesn't require a lot of infrastructure. Actually building a proof of work infrastructure the size of Bitcoin involves hundreds of millions of dollars of physical investment in plant. It's factories, basically. And that's a compelling advantage that Bitcoin has in terms of security. But I think over time, we're going to see both of those become more decentralized, the number of nodes and the number of miners, as new technologies that make mining easier, more consumer-oriented and low-level, as well as new technologies that make running a node easier.
All right, I'm going to ask for about 6 more minutes of your time. Firstly, you bring up the security of proof of work. And I would like to hear, in your estimation, what is proof of work versus proof of stake? What is your estimation of the security possibilities or non-possibilities of proof of stake?
Proof of stake hasn't been proven at scale yet. And that doesn't mean it's not secure. It just doesn't mean it hasn't been proven at scale yet. The key word being yet. I think it's fascinating. Proof of stake has its own challenges. If you take a very simplified approach to proof of stake, it can create a situation where it disrupts the liquidity, because if you have to stake coins and not move them, that reduces the liquidity and velocity of the currency itself. And it also has kind of a problem where it encourages a situation where the rich may get richer. So having coin gives you coin, which allows you to have more coin and get more coin, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't mean there aren't variants of proof of stake that could work. Keep in mind, this is brand new science. One invention in 2009 opened the door and created a whole new science, that of consensus algorithms. It took a long time to get to proof of work, and it's proven to work at a scale of double-digit billions of dollars security. That's what we know. Whether proof of stake can do that, we don't know. But here's the interesting thing. If proof of stake does end up doing that, well, there's some good arguments to be made that you could introduce these features either as a sidechain or even directly into Bitcoin and create hybrid systems. This is by no means a system that cannot change. So we're going to see a lot more innovation in Bitcoin. And every time you think that things have settled down, something comes out of left field like SegWit, and just it's another black swan. Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are a black swan incubator. And just when you think you've seen it all, hang on to your hats. Here comes another revolution within the revolution.
Right? That's why I feel such job security in the daily decrypt. I've had people ask me before, people not familiar with cryptocurrency, like, well, where do you find the stories? Are you afraid you'll run out of them? And just like you, it's like, no, I know something is going to come out of left field like at least once a week, basically.
Right. Yeah, and that's not even counting all of the drama and gossip. But if you just focus on the technology, even there, the amount of stuff that's happening is just incredible.
Well, as closing, Andreas, if you'll allow me to ask you to share, you mentioned that you believe that monopoly currencies have no place in the future and that choice in currency is the future. And you, I believe, have only too intimate of an experience in what monopoly currencies can really do, in that you are from Greece and your parents still live in Greece. If you would be willing to share, I would like for you to talk about how you and yours were affected by the banking crisis in Greece over the last year.
Which one of the banking crises in Greece? Because this is really the story of the rest of the world. If you live in one of maybe 10 or 15 countries that have had mostly stable currencies for most of the last 50 or 60 years, with the exception of those who remember the 1970s oil crisis in the United States, the hyperinflation that came from that, since the early 80s, we've had a pretty stable dollar. That is not the norm. That is the exception. And if you talk to people from other countries, you realize that the experience of central banking bringing boom and bust cycles with hyperinflation and currency collapse and massive devaluation has happened pretty much everywhere else in the world, and not just once. In Greece, it's something that has happened 3 times in my lifetime, and every time caused a generational level loss of wealth for the middle class. So wiped out an entire generation's wealth, back to zero, reset. And when that happens to you in your 30s or 40s, it might be something you can come back from. But when it happens to you in your 50s and 60s, how do you rebuild from zero at that age? So that's happened to my family and my parents 3 times in my life. In Greece, it's happened in Cyprus, in Argentina, in Venezuela, in Brazil, in Argentina, throughout Latin America, most of Southeast Asia, and in every country in Africa. So the exception is currency stability. The rule is currency chaos that wipes out a generation's wealth 2 or 3 times in their lifetime. And so that experience has always informed me, because I don't buy the fairy tale. I don't believe the story of stable, centrally managed currencies, because I've seen otherwise. And it's hard to explain to people who have grown up with this kind of privileged, sheltered experience of the US dollar, the British pound, and the Deutschmark, a few other currencies, and they've seen 30 or 40 years of stability. Well, don't worry, it's coming here too. So, we're now in a time of unprecedented global currency wars and currency volatility. And people are beginning to realize that central planning, just as it doesn't work in other aspects of the economy, certainly doesn't work in currencies. We're all Greeks now.
Well, it has been a pleasure, and thank you for your time. Anyone who wants to contact Andreas can find his bio and information at antonopoulos.com.
Yes, and also the book, Mastering Bitcoin, is available on bitcoinbook.info. It's an open source license, so you can download and read it for free. And it's now available in 7 languages, translated by volunteers into French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Brazilian, and Japanese and Hungarian. We have a group of volunteers working on 34 languages in total. And I'm going to keep bringing those. You can download them for free on bitcoinbook.info.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to your forthcoming chapters, to the addendum of your book on segregated witness and other things.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Today's episode has been brought to you by Node 40, who provides hosting for Dash's second tier of masternodes. Node 40 takes care of the software, hardware, and bandwidth requirements of running a masternode. They're also the world's first merchant to integrate with Dash's Evolution for easier billing and payments. You can learn more and talk to their support staff at any time at node40.com. If you are a lover of audio, you may have noticed a disruption in the Daily Decrypts podcast recently. Well, no more fear. It is back in action, and you can listen to these interviews audio only. Enjoy. You're welcome. Have a great day.